In this episode, we'll focus on NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, as we highlight sensational findings in Viktor Shokin's book, Biden's Corruption and War, the True Story of the $1 Billion Prosecutor. Available in bookstores now. 1 week ago, NABU made international news uncovering a $100 million embezzlement scheme involving foreign aid funds to Ukraine.
Ukraine is suspending its justice minister over what it calls the biggest scandal since the start of the Russian-Ukraine war. Ukrainian officials say they discovered a high-level corruption scheme in the energy sector, including its state-run nuclear agency. It's alleged to include senior officials and President Zelensky's former close business partner. Now, Ukrainian anti-corruption activists say Zelensky must prove he will hold them accountable.
І ще одне. Будь-які результативні дії проти корупції дуже потрібні. Невідворотність покарання потрібна. Енергоатом забезпечує Україні найбільшу частку енергогенерації зараз. Чистота в компанії – це пріоритет. Енергетика і кожна галузь, кожен, хто будував схеми, повинен отримати чітку процесуальну відповідь, вироки мають бути. І урядовці повинні працювати разом з НАБУ, разом з правоохоронними органами і так працювати, як це потрібно для результату. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає. Дякую кожному, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
What is NABU and its legal arm SAPO, known as the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office? Last episode, we revisited Joe Biden's influence on the firing of Viktor Shokin.
So, was Joe Biden really that bad?
He was not bad, but he was awful as the rest of the Democratic Party.
How does Shokin, Biden, and the Democratic Party tie into Ukraine's NABU? NABU and SAPO began under Shokin's tenure. It was Shokin who was directly assigned by then Ukrainian President Poroshenko to build out the NABU and SAPO organizations.
And this all started from the time when the Biden forced Ukrainian president to form a National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which is version of FBI.
Despite media criticism describing Shokin's actions, Poroshenko mentions Shokin's stellar work in establishing NABU during Poroshenko's address to Parliament about Shokin's resignation.
До Віктора Миколайовича Шокіна з пропозицією, щоб він написав заяву про відставку. Віктор Шокін впровадив ті реформи, яким в ГПУ чинили спротив десятиліттями. Позбавлення прокуратури загального нагляду, створення Національного антикорупційного бюро і Державного бюро розслідувань.
For Shokin, the creation of NABU and SAPO was among one of the many ways that foreign influence was institutionalized into the Ukrainian government and economy.
Shokin dedicates 2 chapters in his book to retell his first-hand experience. In Chapter 17, Shokin shares about his first run-in with the NABU and SAPO project.
That's how it looks like my first introduction to Mr. Biden team and Democratic Party representative in the Ukraine.
In Chapter 20, Shokin describes his initial discoveries about external activities of NABU outside the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. More on this later.
June 2025, the NABU and SAPO organizations littered international news headlines. The Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, voted to remove the independent external control of NABU and SAPO by placing these law enforcement arms under the full control of the Ukrainian government. The move, which caused an international outcry, was signed into law the next day by Vladimir Zelensky. It only took 1 week after international pushback and complaints from foreign funding bodies such as the EU to force Zelensky and the Ukrainian parliament to repeal the law. Zelensky's buckling to world pressure is a telling account of external puppet strings pulling at the governing bodies of Ukraine.
Valuable insights can be gained from Shokin's perspective.
July 2025, Ukrainian parliament and Zelensky tried to rid the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, in Ukraine, and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, both commonly known as NABU and SAPO. However, about a week later, after the pressure of the EU, that was reversed, restoring NABU and SAPO. Your book talks about the origin of NABU and SAPO. Why do you think the government tried to get rid of NABU and SAPO?
I cannot tell what the motives were, what the motives Zelensky were driven by doing that. I don't know.
НАБУ и САП были созданы демократами для того, чтобы в Украине делать все, что хотели.
NABU and SAP was created by Democrats in Ukraine in order to control the legal system and prosecution.
Oh.
Is it true that NABU and SAPO represented foreign control over Ukraine? If so, who is controlling them? For that, we must look deeper into the origins of NABU and SAPO. It's February 2014. Ukraine has survived Euromaidan, or Maidan Revolution, resulting in exchange of power from Soviet-Russian sympathizer President Viktor Yanukovych to the new progressive pro-Western, pro-NATO, and EU President Petro Poroshenko.
Шановне товариство, брати і сестри українці, нині влада нас зрадила. Янукович зрадив не тільки тим, що протягом 3,5 років його режим принижував нас в національному плані. Не тільки тому, що його режим позбавляв нас громадянських прав, знищив соціальну справедливість, зруйнував українську економіку. Сьогодні вони впали на коліна перед Путіним, перед Кремлем і стають Україну в Москві. Ми допустимо цього! Ми хочемо таєшний союз! Ми українці, європейська нація, і ми будемо боротися за наше майбутнє. А Україна це! Україна це!
Among the ashes was not only millions of stolen foreign aid and public funds siphoned by the former Yanukovych corrupt administration, but also an unfathomable debt crisis for Ukraine. Shokin shares the hopeful opportunity that many believed the Maidan Revolt resulted in, which was a chance for pro-Western, capitalistic, and democratic systems to be seeded and thrive. It was a dream that Shokin believes turned sour. NABU originated as a 2015 mandate from the International Monetary Fund, IMF. It was embedded as a loan condition for Ukraine to curb the Russian-style kleptocratic corruption believed to be institutionalized in halls of the Ukrainian government under President Yanukovych, who fell from power during the Maidan uprising. The International Anti-Money Laundering, AML, regulatory standard was used as framework for the mandate.
The document highlights two important attributes of the condition. First, that the state, Ukraine, was to establish an independent, autonomous body separate from Ukraine's government to fight corruption.
The second was to ensure that the anti-corruption bodies of IMF would have full transparency of all actions performed by this independent corruption team in Ukraine. That is not all. Influence of the structure of NABU was also fueled by members of Obama administration, not only Joe Biden, but his cohorts Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt.
Heavy influence also came from George Soros's Ukrainian Open Society Foundation, OFS arm, which is called the Renaissance Foundation, as mentioned in Soros' OSF publications.
Soros' key influence in NABU and SAPO is mentioned in EU documentation in 2016, which named civil society organizations, like the OSF, as key stakeholders in the funding of NABU and a counterpart legal arm, which became SAPO.
And all this development was done under my watch. This National Anti-Corruption Agency was created by violating all the Ukrainian laws, and it's not been regulated by constitution or anything else. So it was like a foreign body which implanted on in Ukrainian legal system. However, the President Biden was insisting of forming this structure. I was the one who was against it because this was against of all the Ukrainian regulation, and as a general prosecutor, I have not seen any legal preparation before forming this new prosecution or kind of or investigation organization. I mentioned that to Poroshenko in person, to President Poroshenko in person. You cannot do that because it's against of Ukrainian constitution and Ukrainian laws. But he never listened to me, so he was doing whatever he been asked. Nevertheless, Biden insisted, and this organization, NABU, was created.
From the start, Shokin understood the inherent infighting that would arise between the duplicate law enforcement arms of NABU and SBU. Public accounts state that the two groups often spy on each other.
SBU is the Security Service of Ukraine, the KGB leftovers. With the newer form, NABU focused only on corruption.
The author we're talking about is Vyacheslav Vaslavich Morgan. He's got a PhD in law, specializing in municipal law and economics, so he's looking at this through a very specific legal lens.
Okay, so what's the big idea? Morgan's central thesis is, frankly, quite shocking when you first hear it. He argues that the whole anti-corruption system in Ukraine, NBU, SAPO, HACC, it isn't just ineffective. He's actually claiming it's a carefully designed legal operation.
Yeah.
And his goal, not fighting corruption, but legalizing assets for top corrupt officials.
And crucially, he points out this entire apparatus is funded by Ukrainian taxpayers. It's a powerful claim.
It really is.
Yeah.
NABU was not only established outside of the legal framework of Ukraine, but had its staff appointed by outside bodies.
Among them was the first director of NABU, Artem Sitnik. According to Shokin, Sitnik was pre-selected. Publicly, Sitnik was promoted as a winner of a public contest for the role.
In Ukraine, after 1 or 2 years, during his reign in this office, he was registered as the person involved in corruption and was registered in the system as well. So he was very corrupt. So it was a court decision which is ruled as Mr. Sitnik is person involved in corruption, and he was identified as the corrupt official. So, nevertheless, after this accusation from the courts and ruling of the courts, he was keeping this position as the director of NABU. And at the same time, after he was sacked from that position, he carried on his career as a deputy director of as the anti-corruption body in Ukraine.
Despite misgivings, Shokin continued to operationalize NABU and SAPO, making IMF funding conditions and EU visa-free travel conditions a reality. Artem Sitnik was supposedly caught for illegal enrichment involving reduced rental payments for an exclusive apartment well above his salary at the time. An investigation resulted, followed by a ruling. Shortly after, Sitnik's action labeled him a corrupt official while he maintained his role as director of the anti-corruption law enforcement team.
Interrupted by a sudden interest to remove Shokin from his position, NABU had to temporarily shift its focus to start and publicize a case exposing internal corruption with the Shokin's Prosecutor General's office.
This case was titled the Diamond Prosecutor's Case. Shokin claimed it to be a political hit job to support his removal from office. It is a claim that was supported again by his former boss, Poroshenko.
And despite of the fact that we didn't have any corruption charges, we don't have any information about he doing something wrong, I especially asked him, no, it was the day before yesterday, I especially asked him to resign.
Media outlets carried the case proposing Viktor Shokin's attempt to hide corruption activities in his office and to support Shokin's public image as a do-nothing prosecutor general. It is a claim that Shokin denies. The actions of the Diamond Prosecutor's case still remains unsolved and unprosecuted 10 years later.
NABU's impartiality was further called into question with the onset of the Black Ledger scandal, which fueled the scandalous Manafort case in the U.S., covered in Chapter 18 of Shokin's book. Shokin explains in great detail his observations of handling of Black Ledger and accusations against the then Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort from Ukrainian officials and media. Oddly enough, the origins of the case involve coordination of the commonly feuding parties of both the Ukrainian State Bureau and SBU, law enforcement arm, and NABU. Specifically, the SBU actor involved was none other than Trepek, the former SBU head who was fired by Shokin when Shokin was Prosecutor General. Trepek was let go for allegations of corruption. Trepek teamed with Sitnik to help foster the story of the Black Ledger, mysteriously focusing on Paul Manafort, a non-Ukrainian citizen whom Ukraine had no legal power to indict for a crime. The emphasis brings into question why an organization like NABU, heavily supported by pro-Soros and by the then incumbent U.S. Obama-Biden administration, would overlook such a legal gap. Instead, the public smears of Manafort, a manager of 2016 presidential candidate Trump, the rival of the then Democratic U.S. presidential contender Hillary Clinton, was allowed. Like a real-life story of the American childhood game called The Grapevine, news of Manafort's name being on this ledger, supposedly listing payouts to beneficiaries of pro-Russian, disgraced President Yanukovych, spread across the Atlantic. Soon, news headlines spurred investigations on the U.S. side. The media story of Paul Manafort was spread wide with the support of Soros-backed journalist Serhiy Leshchenko, with his work on this story funded by USAID dollars. Today, Leshchenko is seated as an advisor to President Zelensky. The story of Manafort caught so much attention. It became one of the seeds of the infamous Trump-Russian collusion story. From there, the history took flight, documenting unprecedented political contention between U.S. Republicans and Democrats that stalled active legislation, slowed government progress, and cost U.S. taxpayers billions.
Potential crimes that aren't charged. So Americans need to know this as they listen to the Democrats and socialists on the other side of the aisle, as they do dramatic readings from this report, that volume 2 of this report was not authorized under the law to be written. It was written to a legal standard that does not exist at the Justice Department. And it was written in violation of every DOJ principle about extra prosecutorial commentary. I agree.
What about Manafort? In Shokin's book, Shokin describes the continuation of the Black Ledger case in Ukraine, long after the decision made by U.S. courts against Manafort.
In the U.S., the scandal led to Manafort's professional ruin and jail time. In December 2020, Trump issued a presidential pardon for Manafort, ending his sentence early.
The uncensored beat team attempted to locate Manafort for comment, but we were unable to locate his whereabouts. In Ukraine, the outcome was much different and presented a tainted view of NABU and those controlling them. What was the outcome?
Read more in Shokin's book, Biden's Corruption and War.
What else has happened after, nearly 10 years after the installation of SAPO and NABU? In 2025, EHCR ruled that Artem Sitnik's rights to fair representation were violated when Ukraine's courts ruled to add his name into the list of corrupt individuals.
Oddly, the Diamond Prosecutor's case, one of the first cases initiated by NABU, which implicated Viktor Shokin's involvement in corruption, is nearly 10 years with a court ruling still absent. In 2020, just 5 years after the start of NABU, the IMF found the progress of NABU and SAPO to be underwhelming.
Also in 2020, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine officially deemed the creation of NABU and the appointment of its director as being unconstitutional, which supported Shokin's initial assessment in 2015. Despite that ruling, NABU and SAPO continued, with its existence only being questioned recently in the summer of 2025 when the Ukrainian government attempted to bring the groups under its rule. It was a move that would have seemed logical for a sovereign state to have full control of an internal law enforcement arm that is able to imprison and fine its citizens and officials. Yet the conditions that would arise later would only help confirm skepticism in the government and fuel greater dependency. Records indicating the influence of outside forces steering direction of NABU interests are documented over the years.
Despite these achievements, allegations of millions more and some claiming billions of untraceable aid are documented in reports. Some believe that the bad taste of such NABU-supported initiatives like the Black Ledger still impact global politics today, with Sergei Lyshenko rumored to be an obstacle to Trump-Zelensky relations. Perhaps the issue isn't that NABU does nothing. Perhaps the issue is, why does NABU do something? What are the external controls guiding NABU? Does NABU keep its purposes to be truly objective? Does NABU work for the good of the state? Do they support the tax-paying donors from the U.S. and other countries who are the true funders of the Ukrainian promise of democracy? Shokin's memoirs provide a personal insight unique from U.S. and Western headlines. His insider views expose the scars resulting from foreign impact on Ukraine, as he shares from the perspective as the top lawyer of the country and then from the eyes of a Ukrainian citizen. Both views give witness to the lackluster efforts glamorously spun by officials and businessmen with self-serving interests claiming to support the advancement of his country.
For Shokin, the institutionalization of corruption deepened to global reach with Biden and members under the Obama administration.
Read more in Viktor Shokin's book, Biden's Corruption and War, the true story of the $1 billion prosecutor. Buy it now from the site store.bennyprod.com or purchase it from any bookstore near you.
Next Shokin, Episode 3, The Democratic Party. We dive deeper into impacts of the Democratic Party on Ukraine.
And at a certain point in US politics, Vice President Biden appointed himself, or he was appointed as the creator of Ukraine, and seeing that the victor's problems have begun. And Democratic Party had been very much involved in Ukrainian politics and still do.